to my channel. It is June, which for me means it is officially the start of summer and that I have officially finished my first year as a music teacher. This year I was a kindergarten to grade 5 music teacher. And it has been a great first year. It has been everything that I thought it would be and more. And I'm so excited to be back at my same school next year and to continue working with those kiddos. So today's video is all about me reflecting on my first year as a music teacher. Reflections are really important as teachers, no matter if you're in your first year or your second year or your 25th year, but it's important to think about what went well, what didn't go well, and what you would like to do. Now, you don't have to do it in a video format like I do, but having some sort of reflection or just even some reflection time to think about how your year went is a great way to plan for next year and know where you want to go next. So in this video, I am going to talk all about what went well this year, things that didn't go so well, and things that I am going to do in my next year of teaching. So overall, I had a really great year. It was so great to be in person with my kids and have like a normal format. That was fantastic. I was able to do lots of things that I learned in my university degree to do as a music teacher. Whereas when I had started my term position last January, we were still very COVID heavy and things weren't how they were taught to me and weren't what I imagined. Obviously, they weren't how anyone imagined. So it was nice to have a chance to have my kids in my room and we could do normal music things. We could play instruments, we could sing. We could do things that I always thought I'd be able to do as a music teacher. So that's the first thing that went really well this year. The other thing that went really well, I think, is the connections that I built with my kids and in turn how that positively affected my classroom management. I worked really, really hard at the beginning of the year to get to know my kids and know what they were about and know what they were interested in. And like I said, it really helped, I think, positively impact my classroom management because my students knew that I cared about them, and they also knew where the expectations were. They didn't want to disappoint me. They didn't try to disappoint me. They didn't try to frustrate me. They really wanted to please me, and they wanted to have fun together. And they also knew that when they show me what I need, that I'll do things for you. And it worked really well. I had very positive relationships with my students and my coworkers, and it's something that I spent a lot of time to foster as I started my teaching job in this school and getting to know my kids. So that, honestly, they told me all growing up that connections were your classroom management, and they're such a huge part of your classroom management. The other thing that went really well this year, I would say, is how often I got to do singing games with my kids. Now, because of COVID, a lot of my kids hadn't sang in school in close to 18 months by the time I had them in September. And even then, there were times this year that we couldn't sing. But when we could, we sang a lot. And I had all of my kids singing, and part of the way that I had them all singing was through singing games. Some of our favorites this year were Ickle Ockle, Apple Tree, and any games that they could pass, something like Pass the Pumpkin, Pass the Leprechaun Gold, Charlie Over the Ocean. There were lots of great singing games that we did this year. So we would sing every day because I tried to have a game to go with my lesson every day. And I think this really helped because the kids maybe didn't realize how much singing we were doing. And then there wasn't ever the idea or the notion that singing was something to be embarrassed about or something that only you did if you were a good singer. We all sang all the time, and I did it through singing games, and we really redeveloped their singing voices because they hadn't used them in so long. The other thing that I would say went really well this year was using music centers. How I did music centers this year is we would take 3 classes in a row and we would do 2 centers each class, so they would get 6 centers, and I usually did them about once a term. This year, I was able to figure out a great way to do my rotation and manage my rotation through my centers presentation kit. And I also was able to come up with lots of activities that the kids liked. And part of how I did this and part of why they liked these activities is because they were things that they could do. Lots of them were things that they could do independently. With my younger students, one center at the beginning of the year was just doing puppets. And then when we decided centers later in the year, it was puppets and then singing a song with your puppets. Play-Doh mats with music symbols and music notes. Also in centers, I always try to make at least half of them, more than half of them, all of them, except one completely independent. So either games that we have done before as a whole class or things that they have done in small group with me before. And then I would always take a small group. And this was like crucial time for assessment. So either in my small group, I would be assessing them, or I would be working with diverse groups on skills that they still needed so that they could be differentiated and I could fill in some gaps that some of my kiddos had. Now, some things that didn't go as well this year. One thing that was more challenging than I ever thought it would be was finding activities to teach each concept. And I think part of it was I was so overwhelmed because there's so many different programs out there and so many different resources that I couldn't narrow it down to get what would really work well for my students. And I was able to find some really good things, especially with my younger students, but sometimes with the older students, because of COVID, we needed to work on concepts that were maybe something that I would teach in a lower grade. So the activity that I had to go with it wasn't necessarily appropriate for them, whether it was a game or whatever. It just wasn't necessarily appropriate for the students that I had. So trying to find age appropriate, context appropriate, concept appropriate songs and activities to use to teach the different things was a challenge that I had this year. And it's something that I'm going to work on over the summer and come up with different ideas, because now I kind of know what works well. And I also have a better idea now of where my kids are at. So I know that when we come back in the fall, my grade 3s, we're going to work on half note and do, because we didn't get to that in grade 2. So then I can start to look for things that the kids will like, because I know what they liked last year, and just things that work better to teach those different concepts. The other thing that didn't necessarily go as well as I wanted to was my extracurricular group. And I think part of it is to blame on COVID and part of it is to blame on me, because I didn't necessarily have the best idea of how I wanted it to play out. And when I had thought about it before, I really wanted to do like a singing group and an instrument group. But because of just the time that I was willing to give and the time I had to give, and because of COVID, I had to cohort my kids. So I had to have all of my one group together and another group together. So that made it challenging in that we kind of had to do everything all together. Like we had to do instruments, we sang, because there was kids in each group that wanted both. So I'm hoping that next year I can maybe look at having more mixed age levels groups. So like have all of my 3, 4, 5s in groups together, but one would be more instrument focused and one would be more singing focused. And that one might be more like composition and that kind of thing, to kind of serve the students better. And then also just so that I can maybe plan it out better and have a better idea of what's going to happen within those groups. All right, so now we're going to talk about some things that I want to change in my classroom next year. And the first thing that I had on my list is I would love to use more instruments with my lower grades that are used in a genuine way, not just keeping the beat with a song. Although that is super important, but I'd like to find some more instrumental activities, especially using my orff instruments. I have a fantastic collection of orff instruments, and I want to get my students started on them younger. I don't want them to be something that they have to wait until they're in grade 3 or grade 4 or grade 5 to use. I want them to start to use them younger, and so that I can also set the expectations in for them. I also have recently just got mini pianos, so I want to start to use them with my 3/4s and help with note reading. So just using more instruments is one of the top things that I want to change going into next year. Another thing is a kind of me being a victim of COVID. And when I had my kids in my classroom, especially at the beginning of this year, we all still had to be spaced out 6 feet apart. So I put down sit spots on my floor, and they were all in rows of four and 5 rows back for about my 20 kids. Some were even 6 rows back. So I was so spread out for my students, and they were always in those rows because that's how I needed to be, so that I could guarantee spacing and then I could keep track of contact tracing. So now as we came to the end of the year and some restrictions have lifted, I don't necessarily have to have that spacing all the time, but I'm not used to not having it. So it's my default. So even at the end of this year, I started putting them in circles, and we walk in and we sit in a circle. And I recently got a carpet for my room. So we do something on the carpet, and then we go and do something on the tile, and then back to the carpet. Just incorporating all of that the different areas in my classroom, I would also like, along with that, to be able to leave some stuff set up, because I won't have to have kids literally sitting from the front of my classroom to the back of my classroom. But I could have the drums set up at the back, or some xylophones set up at the back, or on the carpet at the front. So finding different ways to have my students positioned in my room. I still would like to keep my seating plan, and I plan to, because it just helps with some classroom management, and it helps me get to students quicker that I know will need my assistance sooner. So I would still like to keep that, but not always sitting in 5 rows of 4. Just trying some different things, having kids closer together, giving kids the chance to go and choose their own spot to do a movement activity. Things like that are definitely things that I'm going to work on figuring out for next year. And then the third thing that I want to change for next year is my long-range planning. I only taught half-time music this year, and then the other half of the time I was a divisional substitute teacher. So my schedule was I would do 1 day music, 1 day sub, 2 days music, 2 days sub. And it was really great when I had my one day, I was able to keep on top of my planning. But when I had 2 days of not teaching music, I kind of got out of the music mindset, and then to get back into planning was more challenging. So my plan for the fall is to look more at things like a week at a time, a month at a time, and like my year at a time, and plan that way, so that there is a better sequence to my lessons, and my lessons aren't as disjointed from each other. I think that this will be easier because now I know that this is part of the problem, but next year I'm also going to be teaching music full-time, and I'm going to have my own classroom full-time. I'm going to be between 2 schools. So although I'll have different classroom arrangements between the schools, it will still be a good chunk of music that I'm teaching, so that I can be able to be thinking about it more often, and hopefully have more consistency with my lessons, so that they all just flow together better. So those are my 3 big things to change. And like, there's a whole bunch of little things that I will talk to you about when I do my goals for my second year of teaching video. But overall, like I said at the beginning, it was a great year. Teaching is it's a lot of work. And I really feel like at times things were going really, really well, and I felt like I was on it, and the kids were on it, and assessment was good. But then there were times, and I can't think of why, that things just felt like they weren't as efficient, as smooth. So I'm hoping when I go into my second year of teaching that some of that will just like even itself out, and things will just go a little bit smoother and have less choppiness. And I also hope that some of that comes from, hopefully we are done with coronavirus, and there won't be the constant waiting of, are we going remote? Am I going to have to put my kids farther apart? All of that kind of things, all of those kind of things that just added to the unsettledness of the year. Although this year was 10,000 times better and more enjoyable and just more normal than it was when I had started my term position last January. So that is all for today. If you found this video helpful, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share, so that other teachers can find these videos and get the advice from them as well. So until next time, see you later.